Tracy Doherty. I'm a volunteer project coordinator with the Veterans National Recovery Center. The Veterans National Recovery Center, or VNRC, as you'll see there on the table, is a nonprofit charity that was developed in part to help veterans who are returning home deal with post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury. The charity's purpose is to help veterans network with other charities and organizations, perhaps religious affiliations, so that they are getting their needs met and that their families are also seeing that their needs are met. Today, we're very pleased as an organization to present to you a concept that we have developed and are promoting, which is a flag that serves as a visual reminder that our servicemen and women are still at war at times, as in their civilian lives, due to post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury. The impetus for the flag is similar to what happened with the POW MIA flag in the early 1970s. The National League of Families recognized there was a need to increase awareness that there were prisoners of war and persons missing in action still in Southeast Asia. It was a very effective grassroots campaign, which was intended to raise awareness, and it was very successful, as you are all aware. We, as a grassroots organization, have developed a flag and a design that we would like to share and ask that communities, organizations, individuals fly on their flagpoles as a way of recognizing and demonstrating that the public is aware that post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury are important issues. The statistics that we have at this time are that each day 22 veterans and 1 active duty serviceman commit suicide. That is a shocking, very shocking statistic, very sobering. And so what we're wanting to do with this particular flag project is to raise awareness that we understand the issue as a community, as citizens, and that we are wanting to help bring resources to those parties. This flag has a lot of symbolism to it. It was designed by Iowa native Chris Radloff, and we really appreciate his input. You'll see that there's a facial profile. The facial profile symbolizes the American service member of any branch of service from any war. And post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury have been present essentially after every war. They may have different names associated with them, such as shell shock or whatnot, but there is an increase in traumatic brain injury, most recently due to improvised explosive devices. The combat boots that you'll see at the base of the facial image serves as a base for a rifle. It's then capped with a combat helmet, and it symbolizes the many losses that service members, veterans, and their families and friends have suffered. The red circle that you'll see around that combat helmet, that indicates that post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury are injuries of the mind and the brain. The red in the field of the flag denotes to the public an alert. We're on a sense of heightened alert because of this affliction. The slogan that you'll see at the bottom of the flag, "Not everyone who came home from the war left the war," it's just a sentiment that has been commonly expressed by veterans as they communicate their needs in the civilian world. The points of the triangle address the 3 main categories of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. One of those symptoms, avoidance of reminders of trauma. Another, increased anxiety and emotional arousal. and then re-experiencing over and over again a traumatic event or events. For those of you who would like to know more about the symbolism or any of the information that I'm sharing with you, the Veterans National Recovery Center has a website, vnrc.us. All of the information regarding today's discussions will be made available at that site. We have been very fortunate in that we have a number of, experts, professionals, and in their field who have agreed to talk about their experiences with post-traumatic stress disorder today. And I'd like to start off by introducing Andrew O'Brien. Andrew is the founder of Welcoming Your Soldier Home, or the WISH Project. Andrew is an author, soldier, and veteran. O'Brien brings a candid message to his audience, as you will find, about his experiences with post-traumatic stress disorder. And he has authored the book, Welcoming Your Soldier Home, and I believe copies are available here today. But please join me in welcoming Andrew O'Brien.
I appreciate it, and I want to thank Bob and the VNRC. I feel so honored to be here with this flag. This is actually a huge deal in my heart and in my mind. You see the POW and MIA flag everywhere, and I hope that one day we can see this flag everywhere, because this is an epidemic that we're going through right now, and I was almost part of those numbers that she had mentioned. And I deployed to Iraq from 2008 to 2009. My MOS was an 88 Mike, which is a truck driver, but I ended up, the last 9 months of my deployment, I was the lead gunner on all of our convoys, pulling security. There were certain events that happened and while I was out there that had an effect on me when I came back home. And when you go out there and you see these things, all that you think while you're out there is just keeping you alive by seeing it, because it makes you more aware. And you're in that robotic mind frame. But when you come home and realize that you're not at war anymore, a whole new war begins, and that is PTSD. This is a whole new battle that we're fighting right now, and it's a battle that I almost lost. In November of 2010, a year after returning from Iraq, I decided I was going to take my own life. I went home and I took 4 bottles of pills and attempted to take my own life. Luckily, the paramedics got to me on time and they saved my life. And I got to wake up that next morning and realize how lucky I was to be alive. There's 22 veterans and 1 active duty military service member a day that takes their own lives. And they don't get to have that opportunity to wake up that next morning and realize what mistake they're about to make. So what I did was I wrote this guide as a way to help families understand how to support their soldiers returning from war. And what we're doing now is we're actually making a documentary, because I've realized coming to these places and doing these public speeches, I've met so many great organizations that are doing great things, and some veterans with some great stories. And we hope we will definitely be putting this flag into our documentary and helping spread the awareness of this flag through all of our travels. And this documentary is planned to be a tool for soldiers and family members to use when their soldier comes back from war. And again, I want to thank Bob. This is amazing to be here for the raising of this flag. I hope that we can get this to go further, and I will do everything I can and spread the word to every place that I travel for my speeches to help get this flag to more places.
Well, Andrew's words are very sobering, and it's so very much appreciated that he is so candid with his experience, because not all veterans are as comfortable speaking about their affliction with post-traumatic stress disorder or traumatic brain injury. There are stigmas that are still associated with these types of wounds. And so a number of veterans and servicemen won't come forward and speak about their experiences, but Andrew brings to our attention that we can act as a community, reach out as family to welcome home our soldiers and make them more comfortable that, again, our public is aware of their needs and that we're here to help address them in various forms. And we'll talk about some of those healing therapies a little bit later. But do we have Iowa Senator Steve Sodders with us?
I'm still in session.
Okay. Okay, well, Senator Sodders was wanting to join us today, but obviously he's at work, so we will certainly invite him into our discussions when he's available. But our next person that I'd like to introduce is Steve Mulcahy. Steve is a retired service officer for the Vietnam Veterans of America. I was just looking, make sure Steve was on deck. Steve is a founder of the Veterans National Recovery Center and is a retired service officer for Vietnam Veterans of America. VVA was founded in 1978 and is the only national Vietnam veterans organization that's congressionally chartered and exclusively dedicated to Vietnam-era veterans. Mulcahy has worked tirelessly to promote Vietnam veterans, their goal, and that goal is never again will one generation of veterans abandon another. Please join me in welcoming Steve Mulcahy.
Thank you, Tracy, Bob. What I would like to bring to you today, when I came out of Vietnam, I witnessed a lot of things in Vietnam. I came out of Vietnam with PTSD from the start. A lot of us Vietnam veterans, like today's veterans, never anticipated what we would encounter over there. And when we did leave there, we came home and our friends, our close buddies and friends weren't there, so we had to try to reintegrate back into society, and that was quite a tough thing to do. I know a lot of us, I came from a small farm, and I spent my first couple of weeks home in the barn. You know, that way I had something, the hay bales to my back, and I could always see what's going on in front of me. And this is typical. And then the VA wanted us to go to talk to a psychiatrist. And these psychiatrists say, well, yeah, they're qualified because they have a 4-year degree in psychiatry. And our first question was, and how much time did you serve in combat? And they said none. And so I'm sitting here trying to figure out how someone that could go to college for 4 years has any idea what I went through, what I'm going through, and what I will be going through. And that is what is so key. This VNRC project that I've been helping Bob with, and a lot of us standing out here have been involved in this from day one. It's about a setting that is not a clinical setting, it's about a group setting. It's about a group rap sessions, groups, suppers, where, you know, if we can get these veterans to live amongst each other and learn to trust each other again and learn to, it's so much easier to get a veteran to talk to another veteran than it is to a psychiatrist. And so, you know, that's why I'm a firm believer in group rap sessions, because I can sit and talk to another veteran and tell them what happened to me. When we started a group years ago in Ottumwa, we lined all the veterans. We had a veteran across from each one of us, and then we had our wives or significant others next to us. And then I can't tell my wife what I did in Vietnam. It's just, I just can't do that, and most veterans can't. But I can talk to another veteran. So we're sitting across the table from another veteran holding a conversation, and our wives are sitting next to us listening to this, so they have some idea of what we went through and what we're going through and what we can't say. And on top of my problems, and I had a young lady that was a crash rescue nurse commit suicide. She was a good friend of mine, and she committed suicide about 5 years ago, and that threw me into another tailspin. And those are things that only other veterans can talk you out of. But if we have, what we try to do is we try to get veterans to talk to veterans, and then we have a psychiatrist or a psychologist in the room so they can kind of make their observations and help us along. But the thing is, we need veterans talking to veterans, and that's what this VNRC is about. That's what this is about. You know, one of the other things I see as a service officer so many times is when we went to Vietnam, I was in the infantry, and so they taught us to kill people, and that's what we did. And a farm boy from Iowa sent over, and once you get to Vietnam, they said, now kill anything that moves. You just can't do that. That's just not in your nature. So once you see them killing our people, then it becomes a lot easier, but it's just not something you can do. So now, in this current war, you have so many truck drivers that are going over there that have never been trained to kill people, that have never had this kind of experience, never saw what maimed and mutilated bodies look like. And so that's why I believe the PTSD is so much more prevalent now, because these kids have no idea. I call them kids, some of them are my age, but they have no idea of what to even expect. Now, you know, more and more as this goes on, they are, but that's what this is all about. This is about veterans helping veterans. And if someday God permits us to get a facility to where we can start this, and our plan is to involve the families. We've got to involve the families because the divorce rate is too high among veterans. The homeless rate is too high among veterans. And so we have to get these families involved, and we need to get the veterans involved. And in order to do that, you have to have veterans bring in veterans. So again, I'm grateful for Tracy and Bob and all the rest of the people that have started this program. I'm going to stick with it because it's a program that I can see that is going to have nothing but good results. And again, like the POW flag, the more this flag gets out, the more people see it. It's just to bring awareness to the thing. It's to get people talking. You know, nobody even talked about the POW MIA issue until the Vietnam veterans, and until the flag came out, and now that it's worldwide. That's what we want to see with this. We're not trying to take anything away from any other veterans organization or veterans group, or surely not the POW. What we want to do is we want this to start flying around, and we want to start people talking, and we want veterans to come up to me and say, I'm a veteran with PTSD, I need some help, and I'm going to be there to help them. Thank you.
I really appreciate Steve's words about his experiences following the Vietnam War. I've asked some other veterans about their experiences following Vietnam. I have heard that it was a very obviously unpopular war, and that returning to the States oftentimes was difficult. Excuse me while I make an adjustment. But I've asked veterans from Vietnam, how hard was it coming back from the war? And I've had those veterans say, I was never spat upon, I was never called a baby killer, I never heard any of those negative words coming from the public. But what they are telling me is that what they heard was silence. No one asked them about their experiences. It was just something that those veterans had to hold close to their heart and work with other veterans on. What we're trying to do with Veterans National Recovery Center is, and what Steve is trying to do, is get veterans talking with other veterans so that we end silence, and that we declare that we recognize there's a problem, and that we will work as a community to help overcome those obstacles. Now, I understand that our Iowa Senator Steve Sodders is now available to work with us. Okay. lost track of you, Steve. Steve is a legislative advocate for veterans and, as a side note, sits on the Veterans Affairs Committee. Thank you for joining.
Thanks for inviting me here today. I'm from Marshall County. I'm a full-time deputy sheriff. I have 24 years of law enforcement, my background. The Veterans Home is in my district. And one of the things that I saw early on when I first started running for office was the lack of help for folks with post-traumatic stress. It's almost appalling that we don't have more places for veterans to go for post-traumatic stress disorder and substance abuse issues. A lot of these things are dual. And last year I proposed a bill that we would try to open up a center, maybe 12 beds to 15 beds at the Iowa Veterans Home to deal with this specifically. Now that didn't quite go all the way through. We did pass the bill, and some studies were done on whether it could be done at the Veterans Home. And because of some federal issues with the way that the home works, we don't believe we can do it there. But that doesn't diminish the fact that we don't have enough beds for post-traumatic stress, for veterans to get help. And a lot of what we have right now is 45-day help. That's not enough. It's clearly not enough. We have a lot of people who need 6-month help, 8-month help, a year help. And then we can slowly get them back out, transition folks back out to work and get them back into their family lives, and making sure that we're not having broken families because of the stress that comes back from war. So my job is, and I think part of all our jobs on the Veterans Affairs Committee is, how do we try to get more funding? What do we do to get more beds so that these veterans, all veterans, whether it was from past wars or current wars or future wars, have a place to go to get this help, not only short-term but long-term throughout their lives, without the stigma, which is the other problem. A lot of young vets I've talked to, one of the reasons they're afraid to go get help at all is because they think it's going to go back on their record. They don't know if they go to their CO and tell them something, they think that this is going to get written down and this could hurt them later on. Promotions, especially if they want to stay in. We've got to make sure that it's not a stigma amongst our veterans, that they can come out at any time, ask for the help, get the help, and make sure it's long-term enough for them to get better, to get cured, to be able to go back to their families. And, in my opinion, we should have these things all throughout the state. You shouldn't have to drive 3.5 hours, stay in a facility for 8 months away from your family. We should have these sort of centers throughout the state of Iowa, much like we do other centers that we're trying to do with medical issues with our veterans. So there's a way to do this. We've got to figure out a way. We've got to figure out a way to get the funding. But this is one of the areas that I truly believe we can help all veterans out. And then in a broader sense, we have the same issue amongst our general population when it comes to mental health and substance abuse issues. And we do not have subacute beds in the state of Iowa. We have get treated for a short period of time and go outpatient, and we have long-term, which usually for those folks is long-term, most of their lives. We have a huge gap in the middle of subacute, and we need to have subacute beds in the state of Iowa for veterans and everyone else. So I want to thank you guys for what you're doing. I think this brings, hopefully bring it to the forefront, take away the stigma. Let's get more of these young veterans and older veterans served like we should be serving them. So thank you very much.
Our next speaker brings to the table an understanding of a strong tradition of living in a military family. Michelle Udermark, I got that right, Udermark, is a veterans advocate and post-traumatic stress disorder, TBI, wounded spokesperson. Michelle comes from a family with a strong tradition in serving in the armed forces. Her dad served in Vietnam. Her husband served in Operation Enduring Freedom, and Michelle herself served in Operation Iraqi Freedom and remains on active duty now. Please join me in welcoming Michelle Udermark to address post-traumatic stress disorder.
Thank you, and thank you, Tracy, and thank you, Bob, for having me come speak. I actually used to work for him in the Army Reserve. He was one of my colonels. But again, my name is Michelle Udemark. I just want to thank you all for coming out to hear what I have to say. I am the mother of 4. I was born and raised in Iowa. I'm the daughter of a Vietnam veteran. I'm the wife of a 2-time Operation Enduring Freedom veteran. And I myself am a veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom. To say that I've experienced what combat can do to loved ones and on myself is an overwhelming understatement, and it's a long story. But since I just have a little time, I just want to talk to you guys specifically about post-traumatic stress disorder and my experiences with that. The clinical definition for PTSD, according to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, is this. It is a mental health condition that's triggered by a terrifying event. Symptoms may include flashbacks, nightmares, and severe anxiety, as well as uncontrollable thoughts of the event. That's the clinical definition. The reality for those of us who have experienced the stress of combat, or any traumatic incident for that matter, is this. You can never be the same person that you were before. Seeing the darkest side of humanity changes you. I deployed in 2005, a year after my husband's return from Afghanistan, and about 35 years after my father's return from Vietnam. My job in Iraq was to photograph, edit, and write the stories of American soldiers fighting the war on terror. With that came correspondence with news agencies back home, our own publication, and a heavy responsibility of handling the memorial tributes for the fallen soldiers. There are so many incidents I could tell you about my experiences, along with my experiences in Iraq. Our unit's proximity and involvement in the fight against terrorism in Mosul, Iraq, was daily. We were both soldiers and we were embedded media. It was one thing to see things like a schoolyard bombing, an emergency route bombing, a convoy get hit, but it was quite another to photograph and review and log those images. I was traumatized even by the photos I hadn't taken. And I can still see some of those photographs in my mind's eye. Our unit survived almost daily mortar attacks. In the spring, roadside bombs and sniper fire attempts. We saw our brothers and sisters shot, burned, and blown up. Each of us dealt with the trauma over there in different ways, however we could, often by becoming numb, isolating ourselves, and displaying an outward callousness. Miraculously, though, our 20-man unit got through the deployment with only minor physical injuries. On the flight back, I kept waiting for the joy and elation of the end of it all for me to kick in. And it didn't. I was very happy to see my family and thrilled that my 3-year-old hadn't forgotten me. But everything else was numb. I was waiting for the other bomb to drop. I was terrified driving up and down the road. And I was keeping watch at night in my home by locking and rechecking all the doors and windows 3 or 4 times a night. I couldn't sleep, and I could not stand being around people who did not get it. During my post-deployment health reassessment, which consisted of a questionnaire and nothing else at that time, I was honest about my symptoms, and I was consequently diagnosed with acute PTSD. But I did not know this until more than 2 years later. I returned to service after having my 4th child, and I entered into the career counseling field, which was a good fit for me. However, my acute PTSD would prove to haunt me for more than one reason. I was determined psychologically unfit for duty. I lost my security clearance, which was required for both military specialties that I held. Although I had just returned from a school as its honor graduate, I found myself having to prove my ability to perform military service. I gotta tell you, the loss of my security clearance, the label of unfit for duty, and the possibility of losing their retirement I was so close to and I had worked so hard for, it felt like a slap in the face. I wish I hadn't been honest on that questionnaire about the symptoms I was experiencing. But recognizing a flawed and discriminatory system, the Army started a comprehensive overhaul of the military mental health system. This was to address the overwhelming number of cases just like mine. Now I see soldiers getting help within the military. We still have a long ways to go. I have since been cleared for duty, and I've had my clearance reinstated, and I do serve in the reserves as an NCO. But often I also find myself as just a listening ear to someone who's looking for somebody else to just get it. But for those soldiers who are no longer in the service, the VA is a vital connection, and the VRNC is going to prove to be that vital connection to healing for them. My own father has certainly benefited from being connected with guys who get it. It is not to take away at all from the soldiers who have suffered physical trauma or paid the ultimate sacrifice. I just want to recognize that mental trauma is also debilitating, and we don't easily recognize it in ourselves or others. In closing, I am grateful for the experience. I hope to tell my grandchildren someday. I hope to see the stigma of PTSD erased and become a thing of the past, because it is an honorable thing to have been a witness to the clash of terrorism against the uncompromising courage of American soldiers. I am honored to have been a part of the war on terror, and to be able to stand here today and tell you about it. Thank you so much for your time.
I want to thank Michelle for, was a very moving message. And I certainly appreciate her. Well, it takes someone very brave to stand up in front of the public and tell of their experience. So Michelle's a very special person, I believe. I'd like to now introduce Iowa Senator Darrell Beal. Senator Beal is the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee Chair. He was elected in 2010 to his third four-year term in the Iowa Senate, and he represents Calhoun, Humboldt, Pocahontas, and Webster counties. Please join me in welcoming Senator Beal.
Wow, what a powerful and passionate message. Thank you, Michelle, for your courage and your eloquence, and also for literally and figuratively speaking, putting a face on the issue. I think that is so important. You know, it breaks my heart to see veterans who survived the war come home and lose the battle after they return because of the high unemployment among veterans and post-traumatic stress disorder and brain injury. We are now losing more veterans at their own hands than we are in combat. Friends, we need to do something about that. We've done two things in the Senate to address some of these issues. One is a bill that it's called the Hire the Hero. It encourages and provides some incentives for civilian employers to employ veterans. When I was a civilian employer, I always liked to hire Guard and Reserve and veterans for a few reasons. They showed up, they knew how to work, they had a number of technical skills, they were drug-free, and they had leadership skills as well. And but it is nowadays a lot of civilian employers are saying, well, are you whole? And I think this is really sad. So the Hire the Hero legislation does provide some incentive for civilian employers. The other thing that we did is a kind of a transition funding. After soldiers and airmen, Navy, Marines are mustered out, oftentimes they are not aware at that time of their PTSD and brain injury. What this legislation does is to create a kind of a transition funding to identify the symptoms. Once they are identified as a combat-related injury disability, they are eligible for federal VA benefits. Oftentimes, if they are left undiagnosed, they do not receive what they've paid dearly for. And so this is a transition period. It pays for the diagnosis and to see if they do have injuries sustained while in combat, particularly brain injury and post-traumatic stress disorder. It is so noted on their record, and then they do become eligible for federal VA benefits. These are just two of the things. I'm told by longtime State House observers that with the 80-some bills that have become law in the last 6 or 7 years, we've done more for veterans than any time since World War II. I'm proud of that record, but just as Michelle said, it's still not enough. We can't do too much for our veterans. And so to those veterans here, I want to say thank you. God bless you for your service, and for so many of you, your continued service. Bob is a prime example of continuing to serve. Steve Mulcahy, continuing to serve. And I don't see Senator Rosenboom. Ken Rosenboom is he was here. I just want to note something that I think Iowans do appreciate. Ken is the ranking member on the Veterans Affairs Committee. You know, we don't have a Republican way or a Democratic way to treat our veterans. We have a right way and a wrong way. And I just wanted to recognize Senator Rosenboom for working hand in hand across party lines for the benefit of those who have served us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Beal. Our next presenter will be Paul Harrison. Paul is the national director for reentry and aftercare. It's a program focused on corrections-related matters. And please join me in welcoming Paul Harrison.
Thank you. Gotta apologize for my voice. My son decided to share some sickness he had with me, but I'm gonna try my best to have a voice you can hear. About 8 years ago, when I first started wanting to get involved with corrections and helping people during the re-entry process, and I'm gonna rephrase that, re-entry process, because we've heard that word multiple times today. I heard a state senator who's a law enforcement official use the word reentry. I heard another elected official, Mr. Mulcahy from the Veterans Affairs, mention that word. Reentry is a larger word than I ever expected it to be 8 years ago. And my main focus at that time was a small, practical yet comprehensive approach to working with people returning from corrections. And during that reentry process, I wanted to have something put together where we could change an environment in which these folks live in, but make it practical steps of what we need to do in the first 2 seconds during reentry, what we need to do in the first 2 minutes, the first 2 hours, the first 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, and on to life. And the one thing that was evident, the more research I'd done, the one thing that was always effective was training volunteers in the community. Number one, that you had a problem. I'm going to repeat that we have a problem, don't look the other way. But number two, that working together we can do this, but not any one person can do it alone. So I thought I was a rocket scientist when we figured out that by training these volunteers, we could have a really good success rate. The one thing that never occurred to me during that time, and I will admit I was stupid, I never realized that the word reentry was going to reflect so much and so hard on those that serve our country, has served us, and is responsible for the freedoms that we have, including those people who sometimes we identify as inmates. And my first window into this was a young man I called him a young man myself, even though he's older than me, that was in his early 50s, a gentleman who was very well educated, identified by a number in a prison uniform. When I'd asked this gentleman what he did, he told me the story of how he came home from serving our country and found his best friend and his wife in bed together, and he did what he'd been trained to do. This guy's been in the Department of Corrections since the mid-70s for a double murder. And I often thought about his story, about how all of us are programmed to do what we're trained to do. So what could we be doing different in the reentry process? Well, going back to identifying the problem, it looks like to me that when I'm seeing a large number of veterans in our correctional system, right here in Des Moines, Iowa, if you volunteer for a day, I highly suggest you do this. Go with primary health care to the homeless camps and see the number of people who are homeless in our camps right here in Des Moines. Those are our veterans. Why are we not getting enough work done to support like this Veterans National Recovery Center? It's because the people don't know the immense problem and that they have a stake in it, and also just how simple it can be. And I don't mean to be underplaying it by a simple. Mr. Mulcahy talked about having veterans work with veterans. That is absolutely true. We have to help those who know where people have come from to help others get where they're at. But the only way we can multiply that is around those folks, from our elected officials who spoke to us today, to law enforcement, to the laws being made in this building. People have to understand what the problem is, how we can provide better mental health care, seamless reentry for people with post-traumatic stress disorder, there goes my voice, but also find ways in which the community can employ these folks so they have an identity, so that they have a place in the community, and again, at full circle, have the opportunity to give back what they got in a successful reentry. So thank you, Bob, for inviting me to speak today, and always glad to do something here in my home county and my home state. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. We've had a lot of discussion today about the role of veterans helping veterans, about governmental entities becoming involved with the issue and raising awareness of post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury. But what we'd like to talk a little bit now is what the Veterans National Recovery Center is really all about. It's about building coalitions so that we have other charities, religious organizations, private sector, just everyday citizens wanting to help and be involved with the reentry. Jewel McDonald is a yoga, fitness, and holistic healing advisor. Increasingly, the Department of Defense is recognizing that with such an epidemic problem with post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury, that we need to employ multiple methods of therapy to help our returning veterans. Jewel is the owner and director of Morning Star Studio, Creative Arts and Yoga Center. She lives in Fairfield, and she has been involved with wellness therapy since 1998. 1998 in Fairfield, but since 1972. And many of those therapies, such as meditation, yoga, and fitness, are proving themselves as a way to help manage PTSD and traumatic brain injury. Please join me in welcoming Jewel McDonald.
Thank you so much. It's a great honor to be here. And I was very honored a few years ago when Bob asked me to join his advisory committee. I myself personally have been involved with Hatha Yoga since the early 70s, and I included it in my own life as a way to overcome the trauma of my childhood. And later in my life, I got more interested in yoga as therapy for post-traumatic stress based on my post-traumatic stress that I incurred having witnessed death and hearing death in a car accident. From that one experience, I cannot imagine what the veterans are going through. But in my heart, I have a lot of compassion because I watched my own family and friends come back from the Vietnam War. And I saw what happened to my sister when her husband returned and the consequences of their family life. And in my own life, I stand here today knowing that I have tools that can be used to bring our veterans off the street and back into their homes and connect with themselves as human beings who can reconnect with that part of themselves that's never been traumatized, that they never left behind, but they had to set aside to go to war. And one of the interesting things to me as a yoga therapist is that when Bob asked me to join his team, I was just beginning to become more interested in offering my services to the veterans because I was beginning to hear about the problems. I started doing more research about what was happening in the yoga world and also other alternative therapists because I also use art, movement, and theater as modalities for wholeness. And within the last 5 years, it's very incredible how much research is being funded by the Defense Department and other foundations in yoga as therapy, and how effective it is, and how simple it is to apply, and how it actually creates a support system within the military culture, because now at this point, there are many yoga teachers who are returned veterans who are offering yoga to veterans. And what yoga is simple and easy tools. It's an ancient science for bringing health and wholeness to mind, body, spirit, and emotions. And as we all know who have done any research or experienced post-traumatic stress affects the mind and the brain, but it also gets lodged in physiology. So what's so powerful and so effective and so easily accessible to the veterans and their families is Hatha Yoga. And I am delighted to be here today to stand in support of helping to create more, not only within the Veterans National Recovery Center, but here in Iowa, just seeing more and more groups form together to bring this to veterans and their families, because not only is it easily accessible, but it's something you take home and you keep and you own. So if anyone wants more information, I have a card with just a few sites posted on it that you can look up and do more research. But I look forward with assisting this project. Thank you.
I appreciate Jules' information today. Increasingly, the private sector, civilians, are coming forward to help offer to veterans a greater menu of options for therapy. Oftentimes, veterans are hesitant, perhaps, to engage in medication therapy to help manage their post-traumatic stress disorder or their traumatic brain injury. Other methods, talk therapy, the veterans' peer-to-peer discussions, as well as yoga and other types of exercises are tools that we're finding that we can now offer our veterans. Peter Lamoureux is with us today. He is a businessman from Fairfield, and he's a practitioner of transcendental meditation, which is a spiritual arts approach to addressing post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury. We have, there's Peter.
Well, thank you, Tracy, and thank you, Bob, for asking me to join you. I was reading the topic of my discussion, which is alternative therapies and meditation. When we think of alternative, we normally think of something that's marginalized. But really what we're talking about here is an alternative to what's being used now, which is prolonged exposure therapy and medication. Those are the primary tools that are being used for men and women who are diagnosed with post-traumatic stress syndrome. And there is some success, no doubt. But the question is, are there other approaches? Are there other techniques that are working? And the answer is resoundingly yes. Is anything working? The answer is yes. For the last 2 years, I have dedicated most of my free time to teaching meditation to veterans with post-traumatic stress syndrome. I started up in Minneapolis in the VA hospital in the National Guard. I went to California for about 6 months and taught there, and for the last 9 months almost exclusively in Iowa. So that's the first thing. The alternative is there anything that's working besides medication, in most cases over medication, and prolonged exposure therapy, which, believe me, no veteran wants to go through. So the question is how can meditation techniques reverse or lessen the effects of post-traumatic stress syndrome? When you look at post-traumatic stress syndrome, what's happening is that the fight or flight response, which is completely appropriate on the battlefield, when men and women come home, they can't turn it off. The heart rate is up in the fight or flight response, the cortisol goes up, the lactate goes up in the blood, the prefrontal cortex, which is the CEO of the brain, the moral compass, it turns off. Why? Because you don't need it. You're jumping out of a Humvee and you've got a job to do. You don't need that prefrontal cortex. But when you get home, all of a sudden, you don't want the cortisol, you don't want the lactate, you don't want the prefrontal cortex to be permanently shut down. Well, so I've been involved with a specific meditation technique because I looked at all meditation techniques and I found that there was one that had a lot of evidence-based research. Transcendental meditation technique has about 330 studies that have been published in peer-reviewed journals. And of course, one of the main things with post-traumatic stress syndrome is anxiety. Transcendental meditation has been found to be more than twice as effective at lowering anxiety as any other meditation technique on the market. So I just wanted to point out that there is no such thing as generic meditation. Different meditation techniques have different effects, they're practiced differently, and of course they're going to have different effects. For instance, mindfulness has been quite disappointing for post-traumatic stress syndrome, but it is showing some results for pain management, etc. So what I'd like to do is just, besides talking specifically about TM, which by the way is just a simple natural mental technique, it's practice about 20 minutes twice a day. It's non-religious. There's no belief system involved. It's easy to learn for the veterans. And more importantly, from my perspective, because I've been teaching them for 2 years, is it's enjoyable to practice. We have an extremely high rate of people doing it for long periods of time because it's something they look forward to doing at the end of the day. So that said, I'm just going to give you 3 anecdotes. Last July 28th, I had a fellow come to me who had heard about Luke Jensen. I don't know if anyone knows Luke Jensen's story, but it's very compelling. And he was a Somalia war veteran. For 19 years, he had slept 4 hours a night maximum, not 4 hours total. I mean, not 4 hours at some time during the night, continuously. 4 hours total. If he's lying down for 10 hours, he's only sleeping 4 of them. I taught him on a Thursday. Sunday morning, he called me at 6 a.m. and I said, "Tim, this better be good," because it was 6 o'clock in the morning. And he said, "It is good. Last night after I meditated, I went to sleep at 6:30 and I just woke up." So that was 2.5 days of practicing transcendental meditation. 2 months later, he was sleeping 7 hours a night and had a job for the first time in 19 years. Anecdote number 1. I only have 3. In California, in November, I taught a fellow named Lance. Lance was an Alabama boy. He had the Civil War sideburns and the nose ring and the tattoos everywhere, and spitting the tobacco juice into the cup because he couldn't sit for a half hour without a cigarette. Lance was on 11 medications. Taught him transcendental meditation over a 5-day period. He went home. I got an email from him in February that said he just went off of his last of the 11 medications, and he had moved back in with his wife and his kids. Anecdote number 2. Okay, anecdote number 3 was Matt, also an Alabama boy. Matt was a 300-pound, 6'5", veteran of the Iraq War, and had seen a lot of action. He had a lot of injuries. And when he first practiced transcendental meditation, the very first time he meditated for 15 minutes, it was very difficult for me to get him to open his eyes. He just wasn't responding, and he was very settled. His breath rate was very low. When I finally got him to open his eyes, I said, Matt, so what's going on? It took you quite a while to come out. And he said, that's the first time in 5 years I've been without physical pain. I felt no pain in my body for those 5 years. Needless to say, Matt is doing extremely well. He's gone back to college. He's pursuing his goal to be a high school athletics coach. So those are some examples. Transcendental meditation does work for veterans. It's non-religious. Funding is always the issue. There are scholarships available in Iowa because the David Lynch Foundation and Captain Jerry Yellen have made money available. They lean on the Clint Eastwoods and Oprah Winfrey's and Jerry Seinfeld's of the world to get money. So if your veterans organization wants to look at TM, there are scholarships available. Thank you.
Again, I'd like to thank Jewel and Peter for bringing to our attention alternative therapies, therapies that aren't exclusive just to the veteran, because we all have to remember that as our veterans re-enter the civilian life, their families are also affected. So it's appreciated to know that there are multiple therapies to help with families. I'd now like to introduce Bob Krause. Bob is a Veterans Affairs advocate, and I think he's well known as a state leader for veterans causes. He retired from the Army Reserve in 2000 after 28 years of service. Bob is a former Iowa State legislator and appointee to the Carter administration. And Bob is a founding member of the Veterans National Recovery Center. Please welcome Bob Krause.
Thanks for coming. You show a real sense of caring by being here, and I appreciate it. It's been a long road to get to this point with our group. And my discovery of PTSD does not come from being in combat. It comes from watching others in peacetime. The very first time I came upon PTSD, I was a young Army captain commanding a unit up in Mason City, Iowa, and one of our sergeants disappeared. We couldn't find him all day. After 8 hours, someone found him underneath the truck. He had crawled under there, and he had been a tunnel rat in Vietnam, had a flashback, and froze down there. He imagined there was a Viet Cong in front of him. He couldn't move forwards, couldn't move back, and was in an adrenaline rush, hallucinogenic adrenaline rush. After that, I asked one of my other sergeants, have you ever seen anything like that? And he says, well, it happens to me all the time. And his story was that a mortar round had hit a gate guard at a compound that he was driving out of and splattered the body across his windshield. And he says, I'll be driving down the road and all of a sudden the windshield will go red. I'll pull over, I'll wait a couple minutes, and then I'll get back on the road. It happens a couple of times a month. And it astounded me. It just wasn't what I was ready to learn about. But I watched after that, and I watched friends that I could see them kind of bounce down the rough stairs of life. They'd drink hard, they'd get into drugs, they would lose jobs, they would lose marriages, they would go down and down. And finally, if you notice, this is for the homeless in PTSD distress. That was what really caught my attention, that so many people wound up, after a few years on the street, being homeless. They said that initially for this new war, the average time from discharge to homelessness was about 18 months. It takes you a little bit to get the wife or the husband angry, the family gets angry, everybody gets angry. So what is this about? We know these people have a problem. We know the government created it, but sometimes the people around the people don't know there's a problem. And that is the problem. When we fly this flag, everybody is going to ask about it. When we had a flag, we still do have a flag for the MIAs and the POWs, and we fly that flag, we fly that in honor of them. But why do we fly it? So the people that are not POWs, so the people that are not MIAs, so the people that are over here in policy and families, remember what that's about. That's what this is about. This is for the families, it's for the employers, it's for the law enforcement official that can't figure out why this person is so crazy. It's for the kids that their dad or their mom is short with them and can be distant with them. It's for the person that's sneering across that homeless camp out underneath the governor's mansion. If you go down floor, you can see it, or Martin Luther King, you can see it real easy, right below the governor's mansion. It's there. It's there. We look at it, we see it, but we don't see it. The families don't see it. It's easier to chop a relationship and walk away than it is to give that inch of understanding that is needed to bring these people back into society. And we're not talking just about veterans. We're talking about people that have PTSD from other things, auto accidents. The Boston bombing is going to create about 30% of that immediate population will either have PTSD or TBI as a consequence of that, about 30%. The fertilizer plant that just blew up in Texas, the same numbers will apply. We're creating PTSD and TBI people in this society every single day. What's special about our people that we're talking about here that are veterans that have it is they did it for you and for I. They went to war with the expectation that they were going to do good for their society, they were going to come home, they were going to put on civilian clothes, and they were going to live a normal life. And that is what's been denied. We need to act. We need to act in this state to provide services, to make people aware that there are services. We need to do it nationally, and we need to provide an understanding in society that this is not a stigma, that it is a condition, it is a wound of war or a wound of accident, and we need to do something about it. Ladies and gentlemen, that's why we have this flag. I would like to ask you to talk to your neighbors about this. I would like to ask you to talk to your city council about this, to your local school board, to different places where this flag can be flown. If you have a flagpole out in front of your place, I'd like to ask you to fly this flag. It's the only way we're going to build the awareness to break down something that has been with us for tens and thousands of years. You know, in this state, back in the 1870s, we used to have a death penalty, and we abolished that death penalty because the soldiers coming back from the Civil War, they'd get drunk, they'd get in the bars, and they'd fight, and they'd kill each other, and then we'd hang the veterans. And we decided that's too much. We're going to have to do something, and we ended the death penalty because of the Civil War PTSD. When we started the veterans programs, the Iowa Veterans Home, the Knoxville Project, those kinds of things, it was driven primarily by World War I, because we had so many people that got shell shock in that war. Our institutions in this state were full after World War II. We had thousands of deaths, many PTSD. Here today, we have a smaller military, but that military is producing proportionately more PTSD and proportionally more TBI because we have a better medical system. But we do not have the supporting system in society to carry on, and that's what I asked you to do. Now, I've got a hat here. This is an obsolete hat. It's my old hat. And I'm going to ask you to pass it around. We have had a number of people that have gratefully helped. We've had people that have given us legal services so we can get this flag trademarked. We've had people that have given us money to do our websites and get them up to speed. We've had people that have paid for a ton of different things, and right now, going into a national campaign, we have $100 in the treasury. So if you can feel free to dig deep, and I also ask you for Andrew O'Brien here. He has this book here on the table, and I want you to come up and I want you to buy a book from Andrew, and I want you to autograph it from him. He came up here on his own nickel. He got volunteer contributions so he could come up here to tell you about his story. And we appreciate that. We had many other volunteers. I look around this room, all the people that we've had help, besides the speakers you've seen. We had Bruce Beeston over here and his wife Madeline have been hard workers with us. We've had Dan Steen has been a very hard worker. Dan Kelly has been a tremendous worker for us. Why can't I remember your name? Dick Tremaine. It's been a hard worker. It's just that I have a little thing there. And there's many other people that I've forgotten to mention. David Hurd, who is a former executive in this town, has done a lot of help for us. Roxanne Conlon's done some help for us. We've had contributions for different people, but if we're going to keep this rolling, we need contributions. And I would be remiss if I did not thank the most critical volunteer that we've had in this entire campaign. And that's my lovely wife, Vicki Rosina Matheson-Krause, whose father has PTSD from the Malay insurrection in the New Zealand Army, and who acquired a little bit of the problems from that, and she's dealt with them very well. Thank you much. Thank you for coming.